Hello, I'm Seth Adrian Romo from Pages and Panels, and today I am excited to talk with John Aviña. John Aviña is a comic book creator from Chicago, and his work is a reflection of his Mexican upbringing and his obsession with all things pop culture. His core titles, published under his company Aviña Comics, include Lucha Forever, Americana, Lockjaw and Pistolero, and his recent D&D title, Familiar Dungeons. John's work brings all kinds of genres together. Welcome, John, and thanks for taking time to talk. How are you?
Good, thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's dive right into it. So I did check out other interviews you had done. So I kind of prepped my questions a little bit ahead of time. So let's kind of kick it off with, your introduction to comics. I saw in previous interviews you have mentioned that Simpsons single issues were kind of what got you into comics back in the day. That you would pick
Yeah,
them up as a kid.
it was Simpsons Bartman #1 that I first grabbed.
That's
That was
awesome.
the thing that like got me super into comics, and I like started my path down all things like nerdy and all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. So, obviously it stuck with you, and you've had a whole life since then. You are a wedding photographer, mortuary assistant. So, as you've kind of grown in your comic book fandom, how has that kind of influenced the titles that you create?
A lot of it comes from like my interactions with the people that I like work with, like doing weddings or during like the funeral stuff. You get to see people at like really different emotions. So capturing that and putting that kind of tension into my books has really come from like my regular day jobs.
That's awesome. So you essentially, as someone who self-publishes, makes your own comics, you have sort of that balance of, being the storyteller, being the entrepreneur. So can you tell me more about you as a storyteller? Where does storytelling come from for you? Is that something that, family members are always sharing stories, or you just kind of had a natural knack for it?
It's something that I've always kind of done was like tell stories, or like if I saw a movie, I would pretty much like walk my family shot by shot what happened. And I got really good at like retelling like the events of a movie kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And I think that helped me because now when I tell a story, I kind of know what's filler, what to put in, what not to put in. And it really just came from me liking like the format of storytelling. I wasn't a big reader growing up, but I loved movies. So I think getting to see that there are other ways to tell a story besides just like writing a book really helped me out.
So you're the type of guy who like would watch it with the director's commentary to kind of see extra nuggets of information.
Yeah, I would definitely watch a movie like the regular way, the first way. And then if there was director's commentary, would jump
Hmm.
into the director's commentary. And then if there was like more behind the scenes, I would like sit there and watch it or watch like breakdowns of stuff all the time. I still do.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of the downsides of streaming is you don't get that option anymore, so you have to go buy the Blu-ray in order to get it now. So I wish they
Yeah.
kind of added that as part of it. Well, that's cool. So I'm glad, that you were able to leverage storytelling into the comics you've made, and we're going to dive into that in a bit. But, you know, managing being that storyteller and being that entrepreneur slash running your own publishing company, that's work in and of itself. How has that been so far for you as someone who you just started about 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, I started during the pandemic. So
Hmm.
it was definitely more of a learning curve because when you first start, you're just thinking about the art and the story. And then as you start to finish issues, you really got to sell them. If not, they're just sitting around. So learning where I could like release them, where I could sell them, sending them to comic book stores, getting into conventions is huge. And then doing the social media aspect of it. So every time you see a post, it's me. Like I am our social media manager. I'm customer relations, customer service. I am distribution. I'm everything. So doing all of that is hard. So if you're gonna go like the self-publish route, just know that you're going into it having to do that as well as like all the other stuff too.
So I don't know if you've ever seen The Office, but in one episode, Kelly talks about she's the customer service person, how she puts on a British accent sometimes when she's customer service. Do you ever do like fake accents just to be like, "Hello, this is Aviña Comics"?
So I do have a customer service voice, just
Oh my
because like
gosh.
I do like regular day jobs. So like
Yeah.
if you were calling, this is how I sound normally, but if you were calling me with a complaint or with something for like my other job, it's like, uh, thank you for calling the anatomical gift. This is John speaking. How can I help you? Like
Oh,
it's
I love
very,
it.
yeah. And I realize that now, like as I'm answering the phone, my voice just flips and I'm like, oh, okay, I've kind of created a persona for me. So that way when I'm handling it, it sounds more professional than when I'm just talking to people and doing my thing normally.
So now it just seems like you got a whole team. So if somebody meets you at a convention and they're like, "Oh, that customer service person was helpful, but they didn't get it resolved," you could be like, "Oh, I'll go talk to them."
Yeah, and then when you see a post, like it'll say like, "Oh, we're so excited." I'm so excited, but I don't like it's a work account, so it has to be like
The
there's
formal,
more of us,
yeah.
but it's me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you still have a team of comic book creators, so I'm
Artists and
sure
stuff.
artists
Yeah.
and all that. So I'm sure they're also excited.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. So, jumping back to the writing, right? Writing is something that a lot of people, especially in the comic book community, they always want to, um, be a comic book writer. And you've created an impressive amount of titles. And obviously there are even the early ones, I was able to check them out. Everything's just super fun, and I feel like your script writing methods are you're very succinct with it. There's not, like you said, a lot of filler. You kind of get straight to the point and keep the pacing going. With that being said, you've mentioned that Stephen King's book on writing has been influential in your writing style. So how have you seen your writing style grow from when you started in 2020 to now? Like, what's that change been like?
So when if you read the first issue of Lockjaw and then the second one, I wrote those like good time apart. So the
Hmm.
first issue, everything is really tight. There's not like a wasted panel. There's no real room to breathe in it because I was so worried about the pace, about making sure that like everything had its room. And then when you read issue two, I put in like a huge splash page. And then I put in like these smaller little panels of detail. I let it breathe a little bit
Hmm.
because I trusted myself and I knew, hey, if I want to put in details and I don't do it in this issue, I can do it in the next. So learning to trust myself and trust my artists with this is the information that the readers need for this story. Let's not overwhelm them. Let's give them room so that way they want to come back and it's not just like, oh, I have to remember everyone's name. No, it's like
Hmm.
this is just an interaction. This is part of the story, and then taking it from there. So I've definitely have written enough now where I'm like, oh, okay, there's room to add some jokes. There's room to add a little bit of levity and just make the moments count. So that's something that I've learned writing so much more.
And I think part of that's also you have an impressive following, an impressive array of books. So I think that I'm sure that adds to it where you're like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm anticipating more issues.
Yeah, and definitely since a lot of them like we've sold a couple of titles to publishers now.
Perfect.
So yeah, which is great because now I don't have
Yeah.
to pay for all the art and stuff, but the stuff that I'm writing when I start, I'm writing it for me. So if I have to publish it myself, that's great. I'm gonna do it. So I write it the way I want to tell that story, and I think that kind of frees me from like, oh, well, I have to write it and they're only gonna want 3 issues. It's like, no, I'm gonna write it. I have it planned for 4 or 5. And when I start, if somebody wants to buy that title off me, they're going to buy it with that plan, and then we can take it from there.
Awesome. So, and maybe you're not at liberty to talk about, are you able to talk about the publishers you've connected with, or is that still kind
Yeah,
of you're announcing it later?
no, so I can announce it here. That's cool. One of them is through Comic or Press. So
Awesome.
they teamed up with me for Lucha and Llorona. So they have the distribution rights, but the characters and all that stuff still remain with me. And the guy that runs it, Peter, is super cool. Like he gets what I'm trying to do with Lucha, and he
Hmm.
doesn't want me to slow down. So it's not like, okay, we'll do like one issue whenever we can, and we'll breathe it, like let it break it up. He's like, no, like let's get a trade paper out like
Yeah.
right away this year, because people like to collect trades. He's like, we'll do that, and then for the next arc, like, what do you have planned? And I'm like, well, I have like 3 or 4 things kind of planned out that I want to do. And then after that, I can open it up, see if anyone else wants to tell a story here. And then I can take more of an editorial role, or I can continue it because the stories always come to me. Like every time I'm worried, like I'm running out of ideas, it's like a wave of information just floods my brain. So we'll see how it goes. But that's the first one. And then our comic Star Rock just got picked up by Blood Moon Comics.
Hmm.
and they have like a nationwide distribution. So it's kind of the same thing. It's still my plan, but they're definitely helping me with like advertising, pushing the comic out there and getting it into stores, which is huge for me to like be able to walk into a comic shop and see like my book there and
Hmm.
someone else said it was good enough to put. That's a really cool feeling that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, that is really cool. Well, I'll definitely have to stay tuned on when it's formally out there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I think it's important because you are very intentional with including Latinx representation. And I think as me personally, as someone who reads a lot of comics, who's seen a lot of what's on the shelves, there are a lot of amazing titles out there. There are a lot of characters of color representation in the character design, but there's not always the authentic voice. And I think it's great that you're putting that authentic voice behind it. So, how have you kind of maneuvered that balance of incorporating representation, but also focusing on the story? Because from what I've read, you've done a good job with, again, it's a story that happens to have someone who is of
Yeah.
Latinx descent, is the way that I feel like it reads to me, versus, oh, this is just a Latinx story, which I think is two different tracks, both of which important. But how have you sort of balanced that storytelling? Because I think you've done a good job with it.
Yeah, I don't want to limit myself by only playing in like a certain kind of sandbox. So
Hmm.
for me, because I am Mexican and I see things through like that way, because that's how I grew up. So my interactions could only be authentic if the reactions or if the like catalyst to an event happens to have like that like Latinx, Latin just vibe to it, because
Hmm.
that's what's real to me. So the first comic I had was Locked on Pistolero, and that one was I wanted to tell like a fun Western monster hunting story, but I'm not a big gun guy. Like it's just not me. So I was like, what would be a cool alternative to that? And I was like, oh, like a silver string guitar, because silver it has so many supernatural story connections to it.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, so we'll do that. And then my mom was a mariachi singer, so I like pulled from there to put into the comic. And the more I did it, the more I realized like that's something I wouldn't have seen. Like I wouldn't have just stumbled across it. So I just wanted to make things that felt like that, that made it felt like these are Latin character, like Latinx Latin characters that get to like live and breathe. And I get to show like not everything that we do is stereotypical.
Hmm.
Like there are different pockets of stuff. Like I have cousins that like absolutely don't eat some of the same foods that I eat because it's like too weird for them. So like they don't like menudo. I love menudo. They don't like guac. I was like, I love guacamole. I'll put it on like whatever I'm eating kind of a thing. So it's like, okay, I get it in the showcase like the different like flavors of like Latinism and where it can all fit. So in like Americana, the only real Mexican character that you see in that book is Chewy, the little boy. His dad's white. His mom is a ghost. Kind of spoilers, but and then like everyone else around him is like a blend of what you would see out in the suburbs.
Hmm.
So for me, it was important that even though he is like Latin, everything around him doesn't have to be that stereotype. But then when I do a book like The Last Balletero, that one's like a celebration of all things Latin. So for that one, it was just like everything I would see because my dad owns a tortilleria in Chicago.
Hmm.
So like he has that tortilla factory that I get to like go and hang out with and like be part of my neighborhood again. And I work at a funeral home that's down the street from there. So for me, it's like that's a celebration of that neighborhood, of that street. So I'm gonna make it as close of a reflection of that and then do some like caricature stuff with it wherever I can to like really just up the fantasy element of it. So
Yeah, I got my comics in the mail yesterday. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to read the physical ones yet, but the Paletero was the one that I was actually most excited about. So when I opened the box and I saw that, I was like, yes. I'm like, how did he know?
we're working on issue 2 right now, and like I forgot how excited I was because there was a funny thing that happened with that one. When I wrote it, from the moment I wrote it till I submitted to art, like I was so excited, I was so pumped. And then I got it and I was holding the physical copy, and then I thought like, oh, did I make something that's like too Latin? Did I make something that was like almost a caricature of like what we're experiencing? So I
Hmm.
was almost ashamed of it. And every time I had it at a show, I would have it like tucked away in the back, but it would never fail like somebody would come up, be like, "Hey, what's that one?" And then I would show them, and then just on the name alone, they'd be like, "That's awesome," and they would
Hmm.
buy it. So I did enough shows, and I talked to like a bunch of my family about it, and I was like, "What do you think about it? Did I cross the line? How does it feel?" And they're like, "No, like the name is awesome. That paletero is something that connects a vast majority of like Latinx Latin people."
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, cool. I was like, they understood what I was going for. I overthought it, which happens to me a lot. So I was glad that I was able to like continue it, and I was able to get out of my own way with it too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I definitely know what you mean when you say that there's that balance of you don't want to become a caricature, but at the same time you still want to celebrate. But I mean, I think from what I've seen so far, it's a great balance. So definitely keep up the good work. But it's interesting that you talk to your family because that's one thing I've noticed that not a lot of writers do that you're very intentional about. And I've heard you talk about this with other titles that you've worked on, is you're very good about asking for feedback, or at least I've heard you say that. And I think that's important that a lot of comic book writers, or at least aspiring ones, because you're doing it, so you're already like the comic book writer. But for people aspiring, I think there's that nerve of getting honest feedback of what story they're trying to tell, how they're trying to represent a certain audience that they maybe aren't 100% familiar with. How has that kind of worked with you as someone who's constantly getting that feedback? What kind of advice can you give to people who are maybe needing to know like it's okay to just hear, you could balance things out something more or you're on the right path?
Yeah, like just have a conversation with the audience that you're looking to write about. So a lot of my like earlier work didn't include like LGBTQ characters. But as I was writing Cinema Muerte, like I knew what characters were like part of that community. So I reached out to friends that were a part of it, and I was like, "Hey, like listen, I'm writing this book. This is what the characters are. This is what I want them to end up as. How do I tell that authentically? Like, what can you tell me about your experience doing it, like being a part of that community? What should I know is like, don't pigeonhole us as this, don't make it about that." And the more I talked to them, the easier it got to do it. And now I do that for a lot. So like a lot of my like Latina characters come from my like sisters that I can just ask and they'll tell me everything. Or like my friends, just so I can get a different perspective. I'll ask them like, hey, like this is I'm working on a book right now called Thunderstruck, and it's basically Zeus comes back and brings back like the old school curses. So this girl gets turned into Medusa, and I wanted to write about like guys and just like the terrible things that the ways that guys can act, kind of a way. So I talked to my sisters about it, heard their horror stories, talked to my friends about it, and then when I was talking to my wife about this, like what I wanted to tell with the book, she's like, the best way to tell it is to just kind of be reflective on stuff you might have said, stuff you might have done that you thought would go one way, but now that you're like a dad and like a grown person, that you can look back on it and think, oh, that wasn't cool. So I was like, oh, okay, once I realized like it's okay for me to let myself be the villain looking back at it, or be like the guy who should have known better. I was like, okay, now I know how to write this character because I'm not writing him as like a mustache twirling villain. It's like a person who didn't know better, who should have known better and will know better. So I was like, there's that arc. That's what I needed. And now that story is like one of my favorites that's going to be coming out. But it was really just, if you just come to people and tell them what you're looking for, they'll tell you how to find it. And coming up soon, we're actually going to be opening up some of our stories to some other people to come and join me in the writing process. So one of them is Rose, who dresses up as Llorona. She does all her cosplay photos, and
Hmm.
she's going to help me write the next arc of Llorona. And I keep they go by they them, so I have to like be better about that. But that's something that I wanted. I wanted that voice for Llorona because Rose was a huge inspiration for that character. So making sure that they were brought in to do that. There's been a few other authors and people that I've kind of talked to, and I'm writing this like murder mystery story. And it's someone that I met on TikTok who's going to be helping me with it. So she's bringing her life experience into the story, and we're going to work on this cool monster thing together. So I'm branching out to other voices because if I'm going to write something that is inclusive and part of the community, I can't just have me doing it. Like I have to bring the community in because they've helped me get my voice out there. So
I love that. Yeah, and you actually kind of jump forward with your answer at that.
sorry.
No, no, no. I love that. Let's shift gears for a bit and talk about community. Like you said, you're the end all be all, right? So you're the writer, you're the promoter, you're the TikTok guy. That's actually, I believe, how I found you, as I saw you responding to a question on a TikTok. Um, so you're kind of doing all of it. But with that being said, you're very good about engaging with the community. How is that, how's that been looking back, seeing that you have someone cosplaying as a character you created who is excited about it? And that's reflective of characters you've created, work you've done. How's that kind of been looking back on it now?
I'm glad that that was able to like work itself together because that was always my intention. Like if I was making people feel uncomfortable, if it was feeling like too much of a stereotype or too much of like a caricature of what I was trying to do, I was going to stop it immediately because that was never the intention. So I think being able to talk to people helped. Knowing where I was writing about and like the the type of people I was writing about really helped because I was showing them like, hey, this is something that we can all enjoy. I remember it was a show that I did in Bridgeview. It's like a small town nearby me, and this lady came up and she was so excited to see the Lockjaw Pistolero. The cover of it is like a reflective of like this Aztec art of a Aztec warrior holding like
Hmm.
this dead princess. And she caught on to what it was right away. And then she asked me, "Do you have it in Spanish?" And I was like, "We don't." But I worked with my mom. My mom translated the book with me. Like she translated it. I let her know like what the inflections were, like the pow, bang, all that kind of stuff. But she took on the heavy load of like actually translating it for me.
Hmm.
And then that lady saw me at another show, and I was able to say like, "Here we go. We have it in Spanish now too." So it's like listening to the community is huge, and then showing them that you like they can trust you is huge. So I'm going to give you guys what you want. You tell me what you need, and we'll knock it out together.
I love that. Now, with that being said, you've also created a range of titles that kind of interact with different demographics, right? So you have your D&D title, you have your horror
Yeah.
titles. I know you have, I would say you have, is it primarily more horror in some respects?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a huge horror movie guy, so it was always like a lot of scripts that I had written in college that were horror related that I was like, okay, I can retell these stories, but they were always written that way with those kind of characters.
So how did it go about with the different stories that you're now creating where you're expanding into different genres? Is that just more of like John Aviña just wants to dominate the comic book market, which is a great plan? Or is it just more like these are all your interests? Because you mentioned before you are a big fan of pop culture and there's a wide range of pop culture genres out there.
Yeah, I've always been a huge nerd. That's been like I've had like my eyes on a bunch of different communities, stuff like that. The first kind of comics that I started collecting were manga.
Hmm.
Like after I read the Simpsons stuff, I went and I bought all the Astro Boy books and I read them like back and forth like 100 times. And then I really wanted to just tell stories. So it didn't matter to me how to tell stories. For me, it was easier to write horror because horror, to be afraid, is like a universal language where
Hmm.
love looks different everywhere, or like certain background stuff is only specific to a certain community. Fear is universal. So for me to write that way, I was like, this is something that people will enjoy, that I like to write. So that was horror fantasy. One of my friends got me into Dungeons and Dragons like maybe 10 years ago,
Hmm.
and I've been playing almost consistently ever since. But it's like I wanted to tell a story about a group of siblings that were forced to figure life out together, and they only had each other. And the only way I could think about that is kind of like a D&D table where you have like the person telling the story and you have the group around them, and they you can't leave till the day is done. So you're kind of forced to interact and work with each other. And I was like, that would be so cool for siblings to get stuck that way. And I was like, I know D&D, I love D&D, so it was easy to kind of play with that. And I love fantasy books. I grew up on these books called Redwall,
Hmm.
which are like mice soldiers and all this kind of stuff. So it inspired my book Burrow, and it was like my first all age title. So like that came to play from there. But like the sci-fi stuff, we named my son Ben after like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Benny from the Sandlot. But it was just like my interests are so wide that I'm just kind of I want to tell stories in every genre because I want to show people like I'm not a one trick pony. I can do whatever you want me to do. I just need the opportunity to do it.
That's awesome. So, with all these, you're primarily, I know you said you've connected with publishers, but you're really primarily self-publishing.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I hear that creators, when they're starting out, they're looking on social media to find their illustrators or colorists or letters. How easy was that for you, and how has that grown so far as someone who's, again, created these different titles? You working with the same artist, or do you allow different artists to kind of come in? How does that work?
So it was pretty easy to get started. I just looked up like sequential art, the hashtag on like Instagram, and then I found Medicine, who was the artist for Lockjaw. And then I told him about some other projects I was thinking about, and he was like, "Let me introduce you to some people." So he like put me in contact with a bunch of artists that I loved. All my artists that I started with, I have kept a relationship with, so we're still working on the same books, still doing it. I have opened it up for a few different artists, and with like the last Balletto, it's going to be an anthology, so each issue will have a different artist, just so I can give the next person their shot on something that I want to still tell that story. But at least this way, it's not like I have to move someone off a book that they've helped build. So I am open to new artists submitting art, and I always take a look and always give them feedback if they ask for it. Otherwise, I just kind of keep them in like a Rolodex of like if I need something or if I need a variant, I can go to them to do it.
So, as you've done self-publishing, kind of looking back, did you initially start with a Kickstarter, or were you just straight, hey, I'm just gonna find a way to pay for this and then start getting it in hands of people? How did that work so far, and how has that changed? Because now you have a whole website, a whole store, so you're going to
Yeah.
conventions. It's clearly a different operation now from, I'm assuming, when it started.
Yeah, when I first started, I thought for sure I'm gonna write Lockjaw, I'm gonna submit it, it's gonna blow everyone's mind. I'm gonna get signed right away, and then I'm just gonna make comics for like the big creators. No, it didn't happen that way. So I wrote Lockjaw, I paid for it all myself because I kind of budgeted it. I was like, hey, if I have to move money aside to do this, like whatever I gotta do, I'm gonna do. So I did it. It's really expensive to make a comic. So I did that one. It didn't go anywhere. So I thought maybe like, all right, I'll give something else another shot. And I started a Kickstarter for Lucha Forever, but I was already like halfway through that book, paying for it out of pocket. So I started the Kickstarter. Kickstarter is kind of a beast, especially if you're not known in the comics community. Like when I started, it's so hard to get anyone to care, anyone to follow, people to like share it, all that stuff. So I was like really struggling to like get that moving. That the point after that was like I've paid for everything like myself. I've had to like take out loans from parents, pay them back kind of a thing. But it was like working on it consistently. Like I shot so many weddings from right after like before the pandemic.
Hmm.
2020 didn't have any, so I was doing funerals. But then from like 2021 on, just like tripling up on work, doing as much as I can to get stuff done. So there's no excuses to like, well, I can't really make it. You just have to sacrifice a ton to do it. And now that the business has really grown, it's nice because I get like almost daily TikTok sales, which is cool. I've had a like a surge in like website purchases lately,
Hmm.
and at conventions is where I get my bulk of my sales because I'll go and people will come up, but I know how to talk to people. So I don't come up like when they walk by and I'm like, hey, do you want to buy my comic or do you want to read my comic? Or can I tell you about it? It's always like, oh, hey, man, I like your Doctor Who shirt. Are you going to the panel later? And they'll be like, oh, yeah. I'm like, that's cool. And they'll be like, do you like Doctor Who? And then you talk to them, you can sell to them once you become friends. So that's kind of like my approach to it, but that came from like years of working at Barnes and Noble, being able to do it. But now that like I've kind of got this business figured out, now it's like write the book, know how I'm gonna sell it, who I can team up with to get like word out on the book, and I've got to meet some really cool like comic pros who have like given me like tips, just kind of like talk to me about it. So now I know I can turn to some of them and be like, hey man, I got this book coming out. When it comes out, can I send you a copy and maybe you share it? And they'll be like, yeah, sure. Like send it out. So that's worked out really well. But it's still every page that you see coming out, I paid for. Like from pencils to coloring to lettering, it's all coming out of pocket. You just have to turn off the part of your brain that's super worried and just keep running. Because if you ever let that switch flip back on, you'll stop, and it's scary.
All hustle, no sleep, huh?
Yeah, 100%.
Coffee probably runs in your veins.
Yeah, I ordered on Uber Eats a little while ago, and I sent a message just being like, when the coffee gets here, just hold it.
That's awesome. So it's interesting that I've noticed a trend in kind of how you operate, and it's very much an emphasis, like you said, on community. You talk with individuals, see what they like, what you can make. And even at conventions, you're not just saying, hey, come buy my stuff. You're actually wanting to make that connection.
Yeah,
And that leads to my next question is, you've really, and this is something that I haven't really seen a lot of creators do, and maybe it's just because other creators are too shy, or maybe it's just because it's also the impressive number of titles that you have. You've leveraged sort of that relational marketing where now you've connected with comic book influencers. And that's the other thing where it's very cool to see Aviña Comics popping up on big influencers on Instagram, TikTok. How has that sort of worked? Was it kind of daunting connecting with them at first, or
I
I think
was
I'm assuming that's a big plus to see, hey, there's a big person who promotes published titles now talking about your comics.
Yeah, it was scary. So it started on TikTok. I there's a with the girl that I'm going to be writing with. Her name is Jessica, and
Hmm.
she does a lot of like Latin book reviews, like Latin book that are horror, that are romance. She's like basically, hey, if you like Lord of the Rings, there is this fantasy book written by a Latin author that you might not have known about. Let me talk to you about it. So I reached out to her, sent her a message. I'm like, hey, I have like 200 followers on this app. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I wrote this comic. It's about a mariachi singer. Can I send it to you? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. But it took like TikTok lets you send like three messages before you can't send it. It was like my second message. And she was like, oh, sorry, I didn't see the first one. Yeah, send it to me. Here's my PO box, whatever. I sent it to her. She read it. She was like, this is great. This is what we need. She put me out there, and that gave me some kind of credibility. But it was always like book reviewers would do it, not comic people, because
Hmm.
comic people, I don't know if you've noticed this, comic is a very closed community
Hmm.
where I think it's because everything is geared towards selling us something that they're nervous, like, oh, this is just another guy with like an indie book and he's never going to finish it. I don't want to talk to him. And then it didn't happen till her name is Sammy. It's like Sammy the Monster.
Hmm.
I did the same thing. I kind of like cold called her on like an email. I'm like, hey, my name is John. I'm a comic writer from Chicago. I have these books coming out. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm just reaching out. Any chance you might want to look at them, and if you hate them, you don't have to say anything, or you can say that you hate them. I was like, but if you like them, or if there's anything that resonates, let me know. I was like, because that's really what I need. And then I sent it to her, and she responded back a few days later after she read the first few of them. She's like, "This is actually really cool." She's Brazilian. She was like, "I was born in Chicago, so there was like an unknown connection there that she didn't realize it till she gave the books a shot." And then it all just kind of worked out. And then from there, I was able to like reach out to other people because they had seen her video. So you just need one person to help get that foot in the door, but you got to make sure you're submitting the right kind of book. Like if there's someone that just reviews Batman titles. I'm not sending him my stuff because he's not going to know what to do with it. If there's someone that is taking a shot on like independent books, just talk to them because every comic book person in the community wants to read comics. That's why we're here.
Hmm.
So just give them a shot at it, but also like know your audience, like know who you're submitting it to. Don't submit it to like Scott Snyder and be like, Scott Snyder never wrote me back. Obviously, he was busy. So like reach out for people who you see working in it and just let it kind of snowball and grow because it will grow and make your videos, do your social media. That's part of the work is doing all that. And it helps. And now it's awesome because like you said, like I get to see like my stuff pop up every once in a while. And I love it when I open my phone and it's like, oh, I got tagged in something. And I look and it's like someone unboxing their comics that they got from me. And they're like, oh my God, this guy gives you like so much stuff with it. I was like, yeah, I'm giving you back because you bought from me. Let me give back to you a little bit. So
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think I did get, like I said, my comic box in the mail, and I love that you added stickers in there. I told my wife, I was like, oh my gosh, she put stickers in there. I'm like, I don't know why. There's just something there's something fun, but also like mortifying about stickers because I never know where I formally want to put them. And I always worry I'm gonna
Yeah.
die with like a box of stickers that like I never put anywhere. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna put these somewhere. So I definitely was glad to receive them. I'm like, these gotta go on something. I will decide
Nice.
and put some timeline so I'm not holding on to it 10 years from now. And when you're hosting some big panel, I'm like, hey man, I still got my stickers. Um, but looking forward 5, 10 years from now, where do you want to be?
So I'm hoping that by then I have enough like titles kind of like in a regular circulation where like when Lockjaw 25 comes out, it's going straight to a store, like a bunch of stores, just wide distribution. Distribution is like my next big hurdle to
Hmm.
figure out. I've talked to a few comic book shops locally who are willing to carry. Through my relationship with Blood Moon, I'm hoping to really like branch out into other stores, but distribution is the next big hurdle. And then really opening it up for other people's voices too. So once I'm making enough where the comics are just kind of propelling themselves, which will take a while, it's going to be bringing in some of these other voices that are part of the community that maybe don't have an outlet to talk, and getting them in here so that way they can tell their stories because there's room for everyone to tell a story. I just need to see that they're hungry enough that they want it enough because the last thing I want to do is like spend money on somebody that's going to like leave me halfway through a project. So it's letting them tell their story, letting them speak up, but making sure that they're the right fit. And then hopefully growing Aviña Comics is something that people are excited to like see the brand and go like, oh, okay, I trust them.
So looking back now, because you're looking forward, looking back, what advice would you have given your younger self before going into this? That you're like, I wish I had at least give myself a heads up on this.
Really work on your pitch. So it's not just your story and your art that matter. It is your pitch to these publishers because a lot of people will write one book and be like, I submitted it to Image, I never heard anything, or they said no, and now I'm discouraged and I don't want to do it. It might not be your comic, it might be your pitch. Because I know my pitches were terrible when I started. So work on your pitch a lot. Make sure not just that you know your book and what it's about, that you know how to sell it on paper. Because I can talk to somebody about my books and I'm not worried about them understanding it. It's when I have to write my intentions and submit it, they can misinterpret it or they can think like, oh, I thought this character's a villain, but now he's saying that he's not a villain. That's the hardest part is getting them to understand that. So work on your pitch just as much as you're working on the art and all that stuff. Pay just as much attention to that detail as possible. And don't look at what the guy next to you is doing because it might seem like they're light years ahead, but that's because you're looking for like out of the side of your eye. They are probably also doing that to the person next to them. So just stay in your lane, focus on what you're doing. If somebody has a bigger follower count than you, that doesn't mean that your book matters less. It just means that they hit a nerve faster than you did. So don't worry about any of that. Just keep going.
Awesome. Well, John, all your work's very inspirational. You've like I said, the number of titles, the stories you're telling, I think it's amazing. And as someone who's Mexican American, I think it's always great to see uh, you know, titles being created by someone who obviously is part of the culture, but also just is coming at it from a level of respect and care and just wanting to celebrate the aspects of our culture versus, let me just kind of find a way to make money off of it.
Yeah.
So I love all the titles that you're making. So for those who watch this video in the future, hi future people, how can they support you? How can they get your titles, follow you? How can people sort of, you know, get their hands on titles from Aviña Comics?
So the easiest way is from avinacomics.com. You can go right to the shop. You can buy all the comics, and then we'll ship them out. I always throw in a bunch of stuff, and you can even see me packing your like orders on video and all that. Or you can order them through the TikTok shop, and a lot of times they'll have like a ton of coupons and stuff that benefit the customer and don't hurt me because they'll still pay me the same whether or not you have like a 40% off coupon, which is amazing. So I really like that they do that. And either one helps. If you're seeing me at a show, like reach out, come by, say hi. I had at C2E2, there was a couple. They were just like Daredevil and Elektra, and they like ran up to my table. They're like, "We've been looking for you. We saw you on TikTok, and we wanted to say hi." And they bought a couple of comics and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." So even just sharing a video that you see of me anywhere, that helps a lot too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the future and seeing all your upcoming titles come out. So thanks for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, take care. Bye bye.